Centerline fire, 5 seconds. The Klexan fleet captain didn't shout. He didn't need to. His voice sliced through command silence like the lead strike tearing through the gravitational veil above Torvani Prime. Beneath his command ship, the entire planet was locked in a firing lattice. Tens of thousands of warships realigned into converging arcs. No speeches. No warning. Only the pre-selected coordinates entered millennia ago. High-orbit dampers flexed under the ignition of atmospheric penetrators. Each projectile was a city's worth of kinetic hate. The planet's defense network flickered, briefly, and vanished. Thalvarn staggered against the shaking console as the Star Whisper lurched away from its docking cradle. His left arm was soaked in dark blood from a ruptured pipe, the controls sparking under his right. Around him, a shattered bridge blinked red with unprocessed data. A younger crewman choked on smoke behind him, but said nothing. Lift. Now. Thal didn't bark it. He didn't plead. He simply delivered it. The engines surged, cracking through descending debris patterns. Outside the forward viewport, the orbital trade ring, the pride of Torvani, folded in on itself like a burning necklace, its segments shearing apart with synchronous collapse. Fragments of titanium and glass spun away, still glowing from the planet's surface temperatures. "You won't outrun them," the sensor officer whispered, half delirious. "I'm not trying to," Thal muttered. "I'm trying to warn someone who still has a chance." He leaned in, overriding navigation. Destination vector, Sol system, old chart, manual course. "Earth?" someone said behind him. Disbelief. Not mockery, just the kind of fatigue that makes everything absurd. "They'll do what others wouldn't." Thal's tone didn't change, but it cut the room into silence. "Because they haven't learned to fear properly yet." The Star Whisper rolled between the trails of two descending Klexan warheads, its stabilizers groaning under gravitational torque. The command deck flickered. A synthetic voice tried to announce a system failure, but choked out mid-sentence. Below them, the capital region cracked apart, not from detonation, but from the thermal instability of being phase-scored along fault lines. Entire city blocks folded inward, their architecture twisted into molten spirals. Flames erupted in violet hues as oxidized elements interacted with the atmosphere. No firestorms, no ash clouds, just silent planetary death. In the rear observation bay, one of the younger techs knelt beside a viewport, watching his childhood sky burn. "How many?" "None. There's no how many. Not anymore." Thal sealed the cockpit. He didn't want to hear crying. Not now. The ship nosed upward, aligning itself with the outmost escape vector that still had computational clearance. Every other corridor was folding space inward, converging around where the capital used to exist. The Klexan weren't attacking. They were deleting. A last signal broke across the comms array, unprocessed alien chatter, its harmonics laced with deep mass compression tones. The message wasn't complex, just 3 parsed words in 100 languages. Surrender. 30 cycles. Die. Thal copied the signal to the internal record. His hand trembled, not from pain, but from the pressure of continuity. If he failed to deliver it, Earth wouldn't be conquered. It would be stepped over. Behind them, the burning remnants of Torvani's orbital structures formed a lightless crescent. Glowing debris sinking slowly into gravitational wells, like dying stars frozen mid-collapse. The rest of the escape flotilla, what little existed, had either been eradicated during liftoff or had scattered in panic along random outbound vectors. Thal's was the only ship headed toward a system the Klexans hadn't cataloged as a threat. Not yet. Somewhere far from where Torvani once rotated, on a remote observation grid near the edge of the Terran response constellation, an operator at Post Echo 3 stared at a dead screen. The broadcast had come through in a burst so brief, most automatic filters dumped it as cosmic interference. But the operator, Corporal Brand Tear, wasn't paid to ignore ghosts. He reran the file 6 times. The harmonics carried non-terrestrial logic gates, layered time fragments, asymmetric digital embedding. No encryption he'd ever trained on. The waveform itself wobbled like it was trying not to be heard, which made it all the more urgent. "Signals real," he whispered. "Signals directional." A proximity alarm on his console pinged once. No sound, just a red strobe. Then the station lights flickered. And then the deep field relay tower caught something even more terrifying. Gravitational eddies where there should have been none. Not a ship, not energy, a corridor. A corridor being built. The Klexen were already arriving. Bran launched the alert. It wouldn't matter. The real decision wouldn't be his. But someone, somewhere, would see the warning before everything darkened. Inside the Star Whisper, Thal dropped into his seat, his muscles seizing with silent tension as the hyperspace generator began to build its coil charge. He didn't look at the screen. He didn't speak again. He just reached forward, turned off the emergency lights, and closed his eyes. Just for a moment. Not to sleep, not to rest, just to remember something other than flame. The ship screamed through the dark, trailing behind it a message wrapped in desperation. Algorithms in the last atmospheric scan of a planet now reduced to structural heat. And behind it, the Klexon Armada folded its alignment again, this time facing inward, toward Earth, where nothing was ready. Seal Level 7, all delegates inside. The armored blast doors thudded into place behind the last arriving officer. Inside the subterranean core beneath Geneva, the central chamber of United Earth Command lit to full combat state. Fluorescent grid lines swept over the brushed concrete walls, illuminating the chamber with a clinical glare that erased shadows but not tension. Supreme Marshal Aaron Voss stood at the Nexus table, arms behind his back, as data streamed across angled heads-up displays embedded into the ring. No one spoke until the last line of analysis finalized, flashing red over the primary interface. Target count, 15,022. Confirmed Dreadnought class. Time to orbit, 29.67 days. Voss didn't blink. Speak. General Tyne Calder's voice cut through the air like it had been waiting to be released. Klexon Fleet, no support class vessels, no civilian lines. It's a war engine, not an invasion. One of the aides adjusted the scaling display, rotating the enemy formation. The simulation flickered, rows upon rows of dreadnoughts shaped like monolithic wedges, their hulls reflecting no light, no insignia, no identification, just motion. Do we know their propulsion layout? Voss asked. Gravitic compression drives, answered Rear Admiral Morvan. They're not flying to us. They're folding the distance. Calder pointed to the outer rings on the interface. They've done this before. Every system they've crossed, it's the same sequence. Silence, broadcast, deletion, no negotiation, no deviation. Voss turned to the secondary interface. Our readiness. The room stayed quiet just long enough to deepen the unease. Finally, a junior logistics officer responded. 63 orbital craft with full combat loadouts, 4 partially refitted destroyers, 2 carriers under construction, 1 mothballed. No functional defense grid. Civilian emergency systems on standby, but unarmed. Orbital resistance will collapse inside an hour, Morvan said bluntly. No, Voss corrected. Orbital resistance won't exist. He stepped forward, issuing commands to the central interface with a single motion. I want full mobilization. Every manufacturing center retooled. All fabrication lines redirected. Pull every design from classified stores. If a child drew it and it flies, build it. Calder raised an eyebrow. Even the prototypes? Especially the prototypes. The marshal's voice remained steady, but each word shifted the room's atmosphere. He wasn't offering options. He was issuing the blueprint of survival. In the Applied Quantum Systems lab beneath Tycho Base, Dr. Ray Myron wiped graphite from the edge of the Plex screen, where calculations had been sketched by hand faster than the processors could render. They're not just absorbing firepower, he muttered. They're sinking to it. His assistant adjusted a refractor array angled toward the defense simulation grid. A looping stream of projected Terran weapons continued to strike inert digital replicas of Klexon's shielding, each sequence neutralized within microseconds. Then we rotate frequency, the assistant offered. Number that's linear, Myron replied, tapping rapidly. These fields aren't fixed. They're pulse coherent. They're timing-based, not spectrum-based. He leaned into the feed. But if we can introduce entropy, noise, controlled chaos, he corrected. If we spike them with randomized thermal modulations, the shield feedback won't stabilize. It'll overload or collapse. The assistant leaned back, impressed. So we don't crack the shield, we make it trip on itself. Exactly. On the upper floors of the Intercontinental Behavioral Warfare Program in Nairobi, Dr. Corin Vale stared at a wall-sized board filled with enemy battle logs and movement patterns. Every recorded engagement was dissected. Lines, vectors, and expected responses tracked like neural pathways. Every one of their strikes is deterministic, Vale said. They don't react to emotion. They process probability trees. So we stay unpredictable? Number, that's too basic. Vale's gaze narrowed. We stay contradictory, make moves that violate logic, respond to force with softness, answer retreat with advance. His colleague frowned. Won't they just recompile? Not if we disrupt the algorithm faster than they can recalibrate. They don't expect noise, they expect order. So we turn our mess into our doctrine. Vale pinned a photo from an old war archive to the board. Soldiers using improvised catapults in an urban collapse zone. That's what they have never fought. Not soldiers, not fleets. Us. As night fell across Earth's major zones, factories began spinning up under full blackout protocols. Civilian industries were instructed to purge inventory and replace tooling. The global supply chain reorganized under singular directive. Output without delay. In Detroit, auto plants converted to assemble modular warframes. In Mumbai, hydroponic arrays were torn down for metal repurposing. In Brazil, unused stadiums filled with assembly drones reprogrammed overnight. The weight of 8 billion citizens wasn't rallied. It was channeled, systematically, ruthlessly, with no appeal to inspiration, only necessity. And in orbit, satellite constellations were retasked, not to observe, but to map impact vectors, simulate redundancies, calculate where death would fall and where resistance might form. Underground in Geneva, Voss stared at the heads-up display still running the original Klexon broadcast. Looped, silent, without emotion. The waveform had no tremor, no variation. Why didn't they open with demands? Calder asked from his side. Because they don't negotiate. Then why send a warning? Voss's eyes didn't leave the screen. Because they're not used to failure. They assume everyone breaks once they understand the odds. And we won't. The marshal didn't answer immediately. His fingers tapped once against the edge of the console. We may fall, but we'll fall interestingly. He shut the loop down, turned toward the warboard now fully online. Sector maps alive with rapid analysis, countdowns ticking toward orbital insertion windows. Begin the simulation cascade, he ordered. Lights across the chamber began shifting into operation status. Command groups split off. Each screen fed new possibilities. None hopeful, all calculated. Outside, the old flagpoles that had once flown national emblems were stripped by robotic cranes. In their place, black banners bearing only mission codes and unit tags were raised, identities removed, replaced by purpose. And across Earth's darkened cities, inside silent factories, the machines began their work. They would not sleep again. Contact on the ridge. Delta Arc, 5 meters above the heat bloom. Mask optics now. Commander Darren Holt's voice broke through the tight beam comms like a steel edge. No echo, no static, just force. His unit moved silently through the crevices of sun-baked granite, the dirt under their boots layered in decades of compressed red dust. 30 kilometers west of Alice Springs, the desert sat quiet, deceptively still. Above them, the Klexon scouts descended in triangular formation. 3 ships, identical in shape, sleek, sharp, without seam. Their undersides shimmered, not with lights, but with modulation patterns barely visible to the naked eye. As they touched down, their stabilizers didn't disturb the surface. No dust kicked up, no noise. But every predator in the land had already fled. Holt checked the heads-up display integrated into his visor. Target overlays blinked into clarity, ghost silhouettes behind geological ridgelines. He tapped the butt of his rifle twice, signaling the first fire teams to split. Remember your timing. They're not blind, but they're filtered. If they don't see you, they assume you're not there. His second-in-command, Jern Drake, adjusted his terrain mask. These rounds better work. They don't have to work forever, Holt muttered. Just long enough. The Klexon scouts emerged in perfect synchronicity. No verbal commands, no visible hesitation. Their armor appeared poured onto them, tall figures molded from unknown composite. Shoulder-mounted arrays turned slowly, scanning frequencies rather than life signs. One passed within 4 meters of Drake's position, pausing as if listening to the temperature shift in the rocks. It spoke, its voice filtered through 3 layers of mechanical translation. No motion. Survey cycle continues. Holt waited until the third scout turned its back toward the dry gully. His finger tightened. Execute pattern Delta 6. From 4 angles, projectiles arced across the field, 2 from above, 2 from ground elevation. Dual-mode penetrator rounds slammed into the Klexan troopers. Each round split on impact. The first breach piercing the suit's atmospheric seal, the second delivering a reactive compound engineered to destabilize internal pressure regulators. The first alien dropped without sound. The second stumbled backward, armor plates flaring as interior systems attempted to compensate. A third tried to fire, but Holt had already moved. He drove his sidearm directly into the suit's abdominal junction and triggered a manual discharge. White light flared inside the helmet. A second later, the shell crumpled like a scorched beetle casing. "Down! One's still scanning!" Drake yelled as a shoulder-mounted energy emitter sliced through a sandstone ridge, vaporizing a quarter-ton of rock into slag. Holt ducked behind the impact crater's lip. Suppressive, 2 seconds only. They triangulate on continuous fire. Drake's squad opened up, short, staccato bursts from hardened rifles. None of them fired longer than 3 seconds. The team moved from shadow to incline, using the land itself to erase their presence. Another alien moved a flank, but misjudged. Holt's trap charge detonated under its leg. The directional blast didn't destroy it, but sent the figure flipping backward, off balance. Dredd finished it mid-roll with 2 point-blank shots to the suit's breathing seam, the air filled with static and dust. And something else, something sharp that bit the back of Holt's throat. Not acrid, just clean and unfamiliar, like overcharged oxygen touched by machinery too alien to interpret. He coughed once, then reached down and ripped the helmet off the last fallen scout. The interior was still flickering, its interface flashing characters that refused to stabilize. "Record this. Front to back. Full capture," he told the tech specialist behind him, who had already dropped a scanner over the core. "It's leaking data, fragmented but broadcasting." "Let it," Holt said. "They need to know." 2 hours later, the forward base constructed out of pre-cleared mining tunnels received the first full playback. The retrieved helmet sat inside a sealed chamber, isolated and still. Steam vented through its damaged collar, evaporating in short pulses as temperature cycles inside collapsed. The footage ran across a wall-mounted laser plasma array. Everyone present saw it, the last second of Klexon sensor footage before the collapse. Multiple heat sources, unexpected angles, damage from low-tech munitions, no record of response, only a time-stamped error, unit breach, decompensation failure. Dr. Ray Myron arrived minutes later via fast-drop shuttle. His lab gear was still sealed to his arms. He didn't waste a second. "That's it," he confirmed, scanning the waveform data. "The shield algorithm failed on a chaos loop. It tried to compensate for too many vectors at once." "So the theory holds?" asked Holt. "It holds." Myron folded his arms. "You didn't break their armor. You broke their logic." Holt nodded once, then activated the comms uplink to Geneva. The image of Supreme Marshal Voss appeared on a multi-angle transmission grid, his face unreadable. "We've confirmed enemy losses," Holt reported. "Multiple confirmed neutralizations. Field conditions favored close-quarters disruptions. Repeat, the enemy is vulnerable to terrestrial combat." "Repeat that last line," Voss instructed. "They can be killed." It wasn't defiance. It wasn't a threat. It was a fact delivered from the dust and blood of the outback. Behind Holt, the red sand still carried marks, scorched drag lines, fragmented plating, ruptured soil. The wreckage of a force that believed it couldn't fall now lay stripped in Earth's sun, its armor open, its internals cooking under unfamiliar heat. The Klexans had landed expecting submission. Instead, they met a species that turned terrain into weaponry. And this was only the 5th day. "They're blinking off our scope again." Flight Lieutenant Coral Venn narrowed his eyes as the Klexan fleet's sensor map stuttered across the main display in Earth's upper stratosphere command unit. Dots of inbound craft vanished, then reappeared, displaced, unstable, as if the enemy's tracking algorithms couldn't decide where Earth's fighters were actually flying. Confirm using ground triangulation, he ordered. If their eyes are twitching, we push harder. From the forward radar station in Queensland, confirmation pulsed in. Terra-encoded aircraft were skimming electromagnetic turbulence generated by an artificial thunder corridor, a manufactured atmospheric event dragged across the northern range by ion thrusters and solar amplifiers. At 40,000 feet, Earth's first combat jets, rebuilt with modified World War II dogfighting profiles and stripped of electronic identifiers, dived through the heart of the storm. Captain Lore Vask gripped the control stick with both hands, his canopy vibrating from wind friction. Rain streaked sideways across the glass, lit by interior flashes from his instrument panel. In his rear view, he saw nothing, just the chaos he had trained to fly through. "Command, my radar's useless. Still pressing Vector 7, he said flatly. "Stay on Arc. Their satellites haven't reacquired," came Ben's reply. "You're a ghost. Make noise where it hurts." Below the cloud line, Klexon tracking systems flickered erratically. They had encountered countermeasures before. What they hadn't encountered was analog flight patterns that didn't register as intentional. Instead of algorithmic attack vectors, Earth's aircraft spiraled unpredictably, banking into crosswinds and slamming tight rudder turns with zero digital assistance. The Klexons had no reference for irrational patterns. Above the central Australian plateau, Earth's fighters opened fire from beneath the storm shelf. Each missile was coated with variable signal dampers that changed emission signatures mid-flight. The Klexons launched counter-intercepts, but every calculation failed by milliseconds. The Earth weapons didn't fly like projectiles. They danced. 2 enemy frigates were hit before their point defense arrays could refocus. Not destroyed, just ripped open in exactly the wrong spots, where it would take the longest to repair. In rural Kansas, wires ran from grain silos to buried military bunkers, old copper lines shielded in concrete and cold soil. They didn't hum, they clicked. Operators used toggle switches and rotary dials, their fingers blackened with grease. No satellite relays, no digital handshakes, just signal bounce from repeater to repeater. Entire networks immune to Klexon surveillance because they were too old to matter. At a forward relay, Sergeant Arden Foss pulled a lever and nodded at his tech. "They can't read us, but we can still talk." Across 3 continents, hardline communication surged back into military protocol. Red phones, field transceivers, trench-wired posts. The kind of infrastructure Earth had long forgotten. The kind that required proximity. The kind that didn't break when the sky was screaming. At the Biospecial Division near Oslo, a cryogenic chamber opened with a hiss. No scent, no color, just frigid air carrying a sense of sterile menace. Dr. Corin Vale stood over a sealed capsule containing spore canisters refined to survive in variable oxygen conditions. The mycological agents had been bioengineered using industrial waste mold crossbred with iron-resistant algae. "They're not corrosive," Vale said to his assistants, strapping on reinforced gloves. "They're curious. How do we deliver?" Through their own systems. The plan was simple. Klexon atmospheric recyclers pulled trace particles from ambient environments to monitor survivability. The fungi were designed to hitchhike on those same particles, slipping past chemical thresholds and anchoring in cooling coils and fluid exchangers. Once established, they wouldn't kill instantly. They'd grow, inside suits, inside vents, inside the sterile climate their enemies depended on. And when the biomass reached critical mass, it would disrupt flow regulators and reprogram internal scrubbers. Not a weapon of force, a weapon of inconvenience. Aboard one of the Klexon scout vessels observing Earth's atmospheric shield profile, Subdirector Vrat monitored the Earth's military deployment matrix. Something didn't match. Aerial routes were inconsistent. Communications networks overlapped with no predictable logic. Ground responses echoed across multiple regions simultaneously. Sensor feedback loop collapsing, signal convergence unknown, the systems engineer reported. Vrat narrowed his optical feed. The display wasn't wrong. Earth's electronic emissions were behaving like noise, Layered, shifting, intentional gibberish. Rescan. Scans return contradictory data. Then we have incomplete data. Silence. Then a second officer said it. Or they're doing it on purpose. For the first time in this campaign, the Klexan paused operations. Not to retreat, but to recalculate. A delay logged on the war tracker. 3 seconds. It was the first hesitation Earth had earned. At the edge of Earth's orbit, one of the Klexan war maps flickered across a command ship's wall display. Dozens of Terran units blinked in and out of resolution. Not cloaked, but undefined. Coordinates jittered. Trajectories deviated. The map, once a flawless grid, now looked like a scratch plate trying to hold still. And on the bridge of that ship, a commander stared at the failing schematic. He tapped the edge once, then again. No correction came. A human pilot, flying through storm clouds in an ancient airframe, had just vanished from sensor lock by rolling into a pressure downdraft that wasn't even on the star charts. Another dot appeared behind the Klexan vessel. No alarm sounded in time. The strike came before the warning. In a control center beneath the Pyrenees, Earth analysts reviewed the cumulative response logs. Radar static, electromagnetic overlays, fungal insertion sites, misdirection probabilities. Net disruption confirmed, said Myron, scanning the laser plasma display. They're reacting slower. Vale nodded beside him, and less predictably. Venn stepped into the room. His boots tracked mountain dust onto the steel floor. They're adapting. Myron raised an eyebrow. Not fast enough. No, Venn replied. But they're trying now. That's worse. Why? Because they know we're not primitives, and they're not used to not understanding. He pointed to the screen. They're still coming, but their lines aren't straight anymore. They're weaving. Which means they're thinking. Vale folded his arms. Let's make sure they think wrong. As night rolled over the Pacific Theater, another frigate lost tracking near Guam. Another strike team vanished from radar, only to appear again after the wreckage was already falling. And in the Klexan Fleet Archive, a quiet new data entry was logged. First anomaly. Terran unpredictability now exceeds engagement baseline. Tactical recalibration required. Earth had introduced a new variable. Noise. Shut down external lights. No emission signature. We move dark. Captain Daxcor's command echoed through the combat deck of the USS Retribution, his tone sharp enough to punch through the recycled air and tension. Every surface inside the vessel shimmered with cross-fed code. Klexan firmware stitched to Terran subsystems. Each interface jury-rigged to function without trust, only necessity. From the exterior, the ship barely looked human. The hull was a jagged silhouette against the stars. Irregular plating, exposed framework, armored vents radiating heat in controlled intervals. Most of the crew called it a corpse reanimated. Core called it Earth's first interspecies weapon. He watched the heads-up overlay feed in erratic bursts. The Klexan destroyer they were approaching hadn't fired, hadn't moved. It was reacting to the Retribution like it was a glitch. Visible, unclassified, ignored. Still no designation lock, Lieutenant Yannick Volan confirmed from the primary weapons station. Their targeting suite doesn't recognize us as either friend, threat, or anomaly. Core leaned closer to the console. Then we don't give them time to guess. The Retribution's main rail assembly discharged. No warming period, no sound cue, just a shudder through the deck as hyperdense payloads punched across orbit. The Klexan destroyer's shields didn't trigger. The ship never braced. It simply tore open, internal compartments decompressing in jagged spirals. Sensors caught the enemy's final transmission, a repeat loop of identification requests, bouncing unanswered between systems too confused to prioritize defense. That's a kill, Volan muttered. Not quite, Core replied. That was a test. Now we let Colt start the real operation. At Earth's Digital Warfare Center, buried beneath reinforced basalt on the edge of Iceland, code analyst Ren Colt stood barefoot on a thermally isolated interface plate. Around him, servers pulsed quietly, each one a linked node running recursive decryption and injection programs, looping through alien syntax like it was foreign scripture. He opened the Phantom Loop console. Feed branches ready? He asked. 16 simultaneous uplinks routed through 8 nation-state satellites, disguised as signal echoes from destroyed scout probes, replied the tech standing nearby, who looked like he hadn't slept in days. Good. Colt flicked his hand through the plasma array. Now we infect their backbone. With a single authorization tap, Operation Phantom Loop went live. The Klexon network, designed for hierarchy and order, began swallowing Earth origin packets masked as internal fleet updates. The virus didn't destroy systems, it overwrote confidence. Fake damage reports flooded logistics. Phantom distress calls echoed between relay points. Navigation directives sent resource convoys into opposing flight paths. Docking priorities inverted. Weapon systems reinitialized targeting matrices using reversed IFF signatures. Colt didn't blink. They'll notice in 5 minutes, his assistant said. Won't matter, Colt replied. By then, they'll already be disagreeing with themselves. In low Earth orbit, the Klexon fleet began to fragment, not physically, but in posture. Ship formations twisted subtly, rotation patterns falling out of sync. Repair vessels broke away from their assigned escorts and docked with intact warships. Command nodes received parallel orders from contradictory sources. Inside a cruiser, a coordination officer reviewed sensor anomalies. Their screen displayed a local skirmish forming near Mars. No authorization, no context, no threat detected. But targeting updates requested weapon priming. Querying core authority, they said aloud. The system responded, processing. 10 seconds passed. Processing. Another vessel opened fire. A friendly ship responded instinctively. Inside a span of 1 orbit, 6 support frigates drifted off path. 3 docked with vessels that didn't need them. 1 fired at a return, ping it misread as hostile. Another vented atmosphere when its artificial gravity failed to reconcile its new velocity vector, altered by a spoofed thruster command. The Phantom Loop had no center. It couldn't be cut. It had been built like Earth's own chaos. Distributed, ugly, impossible to quarantine. Back aboard the Retribution, Volan ran updated diagnostics. 3 squadrons changed formation mid-course. 1 support cruiser issued a kill order against its own logistics frigate. They're blind, Captain. No, Core said. They're arguing. He walked over to the secondary interface. His fingers tapped once, then twice. The screen shifted, showing 20 different fleet alignments, none in consensus. Pull back. Let them fight themselves. In Geneva's subterranean command hall, Signals Officer Kirill Venn updated the warboard. The laser plasma display now resembled a fractured window. Data projections half-formed, indicators spinning into error states. We're not jamming them, he told Voss. We're convincing them to mistrust each other. How far does it spread? The Marshal asked, arms crossed. Every networked node we touched is now self-conflicted. Some are trying to reboot. Others are countermanding active operations. Their command structure is no longer linear. Voss studied the screen. They're optimized for clarity, Venn continued. They've never fought within contradiction. And now, they're drifting. In the dark orbit above Saturn's rings, a Klexon Arch Command vessel idled, its operations board feeding contradictory intel across 10 decks. The fleet map no longer showed Earth's forces as weak or strong. It showed them as undefined, misclassified, mislabeled. A junior command overseer questioned a trajectory update. His superior scolded him for the delay. Neither noticed the incoming Terran probe that dropped a reflector satellite into the ring shadow and activated its signal repeater. That satellite began pulsing frequencies recorded from fallen Klexon ships, recordings of distress, surrender, and command revocation, all layered together into a tonal scramble. The Arch ship reeled, its interface freezing twice in 10 seconds. From behind it, a Terran stealth craft passed undetected. In Iceland, Colt smiled without celebration. Confirmed distribution? He asked quietly. His second nodded. Every major battle group now has at least 1 element reporting to a Phantom authority. Some are creating their own branches based on false validation loops. Then the system's digesting itself. Next phase? No, Colt said. Now we wait. And they did. For 22 minutes, Earth went silent. The Klexon fleet drifted, missions paused, strategies unraveled. The war machine, without being hit directly, lost its direction. But silence doesn't last forever. On Earth's Deep Space Observatory grid, a long-range gravimetric sensor began howling. An alert sound so rare that two technicians had to check manuals just to confirm it wasn't a fault. A ripple was forming. Not a fleet, not a vessel, a corridor. Something was tunneling toward them, and it wasn't Klexon. Inside United Earth Command, Voss stood in front of a blinking red confirmation light. His face didn't move. His eyes locked on the only words that mattered now. Unregistered inbound mass. High-dimensional instability. A new variable was arriving, and nothing in their simulations had accounted for it. Eyes on the distortion line. It's not stabilizing. Lyric John's voice carried a chill across the observation deck, though the climate control system hadn't dropped a degree. He stood before the edge-tier gravimetric scope at Deep Station Varnholt, and all readings had become erratic. Not scrambled, alien. The display at his side pulsed in low-frequency patterns, each echo fainter than the last, like the machine itself wanted to stop listening. "What do you mean not stabilizing?" asked Signals Officer Coral Venn, stepping into the viewing corridor. John didn't respond immediately. He gestured instead toward the projected readout forming on the laser plasma panel. "You're not looking at a vessel," John muttered. "You're looking at a doorway that doesn't want to be one." Below the scope, a slice of black twisted against background radiation near Jupiter. Not an absence of light, but a reconfiguration. The planet's clouds dragged sideways as if nudged by something with no mass and too much weight. Venn checked his feed. That distortion's altering particle motion in its own direction. Not toward us, outward. "It's erasing trajectory itself," Jan replied. "Not pulling matter in, redefining where it belongs." In Geneva, Voss reviewed the report under reduced lighting. The warboard, usually a blur of intercepted movement and relayed telemetry, had gone almost still. "Timeline to contact?" "Unknown," answered Coronvale, stepping beside him. "There's no measurable velocity. It's moving, but in relation to what? Nothing's consistent." Voss didn't blink. "Then it's not propulsion, it's penetration." Vale nodded. "That's the working assumption." "Tell me something I don't want to hear." Vale reached into his jacket and pulled the hard copy of the decrypted Klexon archive recovered 2 months prior. "They call it a void hunter. Not because it hunts in space, because it hunts through it." He set the folder down. "And they're not here because of the war." Voss looked up. "They're here because of the energy signature the war released." On the outer perimeter of Saturn's monitoring net, an early warning satellite twisted sideways. No mechanical failure, no impact. The stars behind it shifted shape. The field cameras captured only static for 6 seconds before power levels dropped to 0. A backup beacon sent its final burst before collapsing. The signal showed something moving inside the breach. No outline, no symmetry. Just limbs where geometry shouldn't allow them. The shape vibrated differently across every observational layer. Some saw it as solid, others as wave. A few instruments labeled it as blank, a concept they weren't programmed to process. Earth's sensor grid blacklisted the shape automatically. It didn't meet any criteria for life or machine. That was its advantage. Deep within the Arctic Arcology Complex, Dr. Ray Myron reviewed containment metrics. The data from the breach wasn't just unsettling, it was breaking the input arrays. The numbers returned in irrational ratios, some forming loops, others crashing the translation software outright. "They're not just immune to logic," he said quietly to his team. "They react to its presence." Assistant researchers cross-checked references from captured Klexon data logs. Energy weapon impact leads to expansion. Kinetic projectiles cause wave bleed, but no direct material degradation. "So we're not hurting it," one technician said. "We're feeding it." Myron turned toward the display showing the rift front, a growing distortion halo flickering behind Jupiter. The temperature readings around the anomaly weren't falling. They were simply disappearing, as though measurement itself was being rejected. "Anything based on dimensional constants won't hold," Myron added. "Then what do we use?" asked his assistant. He didn't answer. He was watching a star dim out behind the breach. Not fade. Vanish. Aboard the Retribution, Captain Dax Core studied the forward lens array. "That's not a fleet. That's a predator," he said, watching the darkness ripple like a muscle under a skin of gravity. "Weapons won't map," said Volan. "It doesn't have surface registration, no topography. We can't lock onto mass because it keeps folding inward. Try sound, Core muttered. Volan frowned. Audio resonance. The systems team adjusted the targeting protocols. Instead of tracking movement, they broadcast tonal pulses across variable frequencies. The moment the first harmonic touched the anomaly, the ship's audio grid screamed. Vibrations triggered through every surface, the hull shaking with something that wasn't vibration, but memory of it. Core gripped the console. Record that. What was that? Volan asked. A reply. Within the Klexon flagship, stationed beyond Neptune, their lead war director reactivated dormant protocol stacks. Lines of Klexon code updated on their own. Data returning to the ship before it had finished asking for it. The Void Hunter hadn't touched them yet, but every biological unit on board had slowed. No disease, just interruption. As if thought itself was being diluted, their systems picked up a strange transmission. You brought war. Now war brings us. And for the first time, their tactical projection maps stopped updating. The enemy couldn't be simulated. So they began retreat procedures. But the corridor was still open. They wouldn't make it in time. In Geneva, Voss gave the order. Push for conditional alliance. You mean contact them? We don't have to like them. We need them to be afraid with us. Signals Officer Venn routed a widecast message using converted Klexon encryption keys. The transmission wasn't long. Your enemy has followed you here. We will stand. You should too. For a long moment, no response came. Then the Klexon fleet halted its withdrawal and turned. Back at Deep Station Varnholt, Jan pointed to the distortion boundary forming a second ripple. Another's coming, he whispered. Another what? The operator asked. John exhaled through his teeth. Another silence given shape. In the reflection of the scope, the stars flickered and rearranged themselves. Not blocked, rewritten. Earth had crippled an empire by confusing it. Now it faced something confusion couldn't touch. Because the Void Hunters were not confused. They were hungry. Execute dagger. All wings. Burn the time code. No retries. Wing Commander Drain Vale locked his oxygen mask tighter as the command echoed across encrypted channels. Earth's first joint fleet, the grim amalgam of Terran ingenuity and Klexon resilience, burned toward the anomaly now twisting the orbit of Ganymede. He could see it clearly through the canopy, a bulge in reality that didn't glow, didn't pulse, just unmade whatever it touched. The Void Hunter. No simulations had captured the way it moved. Each tendril behaved like a separate law of physics. Gravity stuttered when it turned. Time lapsed strangely near its outline. Ships appeared to lurch even while holding velocity. Vale's eyes flicked to the heads-up display, confirming phase sync. Green, still holding. All anchor pods prepare tethering deployment, called Admiral Rain over Fleet Command. Trigger on my second mark. Not early, not late. In the payload deck of the USS Retribution, 4 massive dimensional anchors sat braced in shock-absorbing cradles. Each had been constructed in segments. Earth magnetic containment, Klexon subspace stabilization, and a hybrid emitter array that used focused randomness. Human-designed, Klexon-calibrated. You still think this will hold it? Lieutenant Volan asked, tightening the final control loop. Core's reply came without turning. It doesn't have to hold it. Just make it forget where else it could be. At T-minus 11 seconds to intercept, Drain Vale's squadron broke formation. His fighters dove beneath the Hunter's core shadow, using gravitational distortion like a slingshot. Inertial guidance fought to keep up. Artificial horizon lines rotated 3 times in a second before stabilizing. Scramble the flank pattern, Vale ordered. I want erratic flight paths. Keep its attention wide. Pilot Merrick's voice cut in, ragged but controlled. My targeting won't stabilize. Thrusters are misfiring. That's not your ship, Vale replied. That's the field. Ignore what your instincts say. Fly the program, not your nerves. The Void Hunter's surface shimmered, not with light, but with flickers of environmental rejection. Stars behind it twisted sideways. Spectral audio screamed into low-frequency bursts as the anomaly fed off electromagnetic residue. It wasn't watching them. It was tasting the space they occupied. From the Klexon dreadnought Volokar Tan, Ambassador Rand Valek observed the anchor pod telemetry. "This is new territory for us," he said. Rain responded over the link, calm. "It's new for everyone. If this fails, we have no contingency. It won't fail. We've made too many mistakes to get this part wrong." Valek gave a low signal tone. Klex in acknowledgement. "I hope your species is as good at endings as you are at chaos." At zero mark, the anchor pods deployed. 4 torpedo-shaped modules separated from Terran and Klexan carriers, each burning in staggered arcs. Upon reaching designated phase bubbles, they activated subspace teeth, claws that bit into the anomaly's quantum overlap. For 3 seconds, nothing happened. Then everything changed. The Void Hunter twisted inward. The shimmer collapsed into defined edges. Space around it rippled once, violently, and then stilled. It had form. It was locked. "Anchor hold confirmed," shouted Volan aboard the Retribution. "Tether point stable. It's in." Admiral Rain gave no pause. "All platforms, release warlords." The strike began with biodispersal. Modified fungal agents, fine-tuned to target anything with phased energy respiration, scattered from Terran atmospheric spreaders. The spores clung to dimensional creases, feeding off entropy itself. Where they touched, the hunter recoiled, not in pain but in confusion. Its body twisted into folds that clashed with themselves. Then came the gravimetric mines. Klexan launchers fired rupture payloads, each tuned to a specific frequency learned from the previous dimensional instability over Jupiter. As they exploded, the warheads didn't blast outward. They imploded small zones of consistency, turning slices of space into temporary dead zones. The hunter faltered. Then the antimatter chain fired. The Retribution, acting as the central delivery node, released a cluster of mirrored charges, Earth-design casing, Klexan implosion cores. The charges detonated not at contact, but at proximity to instability. What followed defied traditional interpretation. Light reversed once, then repeated. The colors that flashed didn't belong to the spectrum. Sound came through instruments as something like organ failure translated into data. Inside the hunter's core, the anchor pods pulsed one last time, igniting the chain feedback built into their coils. A second passed. The creature fractured. The break didn't happen all at once. It began in 3 dimensions, then surged outward, slicing along geometries that had never existed in Earth's math. Parts of the hunter crumpled inward like wet cloth. Other segments broke into splinters of colorless energy. One section fled, not away, but into a direction nobody could name. And then, finally, silence. On board the Volakartan, every system stopped transmitting warning codes. Rand Valek said nothing. He simply walked to the viewport and watched the black space where the creature had been, now littered with afterburn fractures glowing faintly in every direction. He activated his recording beacon. Confirmed dimensional kill. 1 entity neutralized. Terran strategy, viable. Repeat, strategy, viable. In Geneva, Voss sat without moving as the final image filtered in through plasma display. The silhouette of the anchored zone, now dim, fractured, but intact. He turned to Larrick John, who had spent hours trying to describe the indescribable. "You said they couldn't be fought." "They couldn't," John replied. "Until now." "What changed?" John looked at the field map again. His voice was barely audible. "We gave the chaos form, and then we broke it." Drainvale's squadron regrouped on the far side of the debris field. His systems were still correcting telemetry lag. Every compass flickered for a few more seconds before recalibrating. One of his younger wingmen asked over comms, "Was that a win?" Vale didn't answer at first. He looked back toward the flickering remains, still distorting the star field in angles that gave him nausea just by looking too long. Then at last he said, "That was possible." And now they know that. Behind him in the kill zone, fragments of something that had once hunted galaxies floated quietly, glowing, flickering, scattered like memory refusing to reassemble. "Trigger the broadcast, all towers, every channel. Let them hear what survival sounds like." Captain Daxcor gave the order while locked in sync with the fleet's forward dispersal curve, his ship veering between debris remnants from the last hunter strike. The waveform panel on his heads-up display shimmered. Human voices, clashing percussion, crowded noise loops, laughter distorted into rhythmic chaos. Not military comms, not structured command tones. Confusion engineered to weaponize pattern failure. Across 5 low-orbit stations, Earth blasted itself into the void. Children shouting over music, a choir stuttering in 11 languages, drill rhythms from war memorials overlaid with thunder, static-filled chants, screams cut with violin strings. No filter, no uniformity. The second Void Hunter cracked before the anchor even touched it. Its limbs elongated and shrank simultaneously, as if each input fractured how it defined itself. Time around it looped a half-second forward, then bled backward. Ships lagged and jumped, caught in a storm of displaced gravity, but no one broke formation. Inside Retribution, Volan barked over comms. Anchor is stabilizing, phase teeth are holding, but it's resisting sink. Core didn't flinch. That's fine. Confusion's part of the hook. Fighter squadrons spiraled around the beast's flickering form. The Klexan carriers advanced in a loose wheel, matching Earth's hybrid units with eerie precision. Where they had once demanded order, they now moved in flexible cohesion. The Void Hunter howled through every sensor at once, a distortion chorus that bent signal lines and shook hull panels. Core rotated the frequency board again. Push the ambient data up. Full modulation. On cue, the broadcast surged. This time it wasn't music. It was silence followed by a child's heartbeat. Then applause. Then a preacher's voice repeating a simple line. "You're not welcome here." The hunter recoiled. That was enough. The anchors latched. Graviton fields buckled, locked. Earth bombers launched dual-burst payloads, detonators that expanded, inverted, and collapsed space within 30 milliseconds. The creature didn't die with screams. It died wrong. It folded in on itself like wet paper and disappeared sideways into a tear that left the stars scarred. The second hunter was gone. Larrick John watched the laser plasma display in the Geneva command vault as satellite visuals tracked the distortion levels across the solar boundary. 2 more were inbound. The sensors bent again, not with speed, with arrival. "These next ones," John muttered, "they've seen what we did." Vale stepped up beside him. "Then they'll adjust." "Not enough," John replied. "We don't run loops. We burn new patterns." On Earth's upper orbital trench, Battle Group Centurion A repositioned under Admiral Rain's command. 47 vessels, 4 species on board. One doctrine: fly erratically, broadcast unpredictably, fight like memory isn't real. Each ship had been assigned its own chaos signature. Some blasted cultural rituals, others played archived love letters, sports commentary, jazz without melody. One cruiser simply transmitted the sound of Earth's forests, layered under mechanical shrieks and baby giggles. None of it made sense. That was the point. The third hunter tried to phase in. The moment its leading edge passed into anchor range, Captain Vale's wing dived in from the lower orbital strata. 8 ships flying inversion arcs, releasing tagged warheads guided not by trajectory, but by audio pattern sync. Each detonation disrupted the hunter's resonance. The creature twisted in on itself, and then collapsed before it could even form a counterpulse. By the time the 4th hunter reached the edge of Mars' orbital path, the Terran Klexan fleet had mapped the timing to deploy psychological dampeners. Signals carried regret recordings, war eulogies, and unsynced metronome ticks fed through modulated breath rates. It didn't matter how fast the hunter moved. It could not stay. Not in this kind of space. Not in this kind of noise. The last anchor deployed. 4 tethers linked into one point. The hunter buckled. Not from force, but from contradiction. Its structure couldn't reconcile what it was being exposed to. Chaos that acted with purpose. Instinct honed into logic. Life weaponized into pattern breaking. The antimatter core ignited one final time. This time, the silence after the implosion didn't linger. It settled, and the war was over. In Geneva's command chamber, as the red lines vanished from every screen, Supreme Marshal Voss didn't speak. He just looked at the final data string trailing across the feed. It wasn't a report. It was Earth's transmission to the Klexan fleet, automatically generated as protocol finish. "We don't claim victory, we claim understanding." Rand Valak stood before the Terran Council hours later. his skin bruised from atmospheric recoil during the final Hunter collapse, his voice sharp with unprocessed truth. When our empire encountered them first, we ran. We built doctrine on that retreat, an empire of fear. He turned slowly toward the flags hanging in the treaty chamber. You didn't run. You refused to play the same game. You taught the fire how to burn, not by control, but by feeding it something it couldn't consume. He looked to Voss. You recalibrated the galaxy. Voss replied without hesitation. We just stopped dying in the way they expected. Above Earth, debris traced arcs of memory across orbit, broken tethers, torn hull panels, static fragments of language loops. The sky was filled with scars, but it was quiet, not empty, not abandoned, just done. Ships returned to dock, anchors drifted down to the oceans, and for the first time in known history, two civilizations signed a treaty not because they had learned peace, but because they had learned adaptation. In the shadow of a war that nearly unmade reality, Earth became the reference point for unpredictability, chaos, and survival. And somewhere beyond map systems, the few hunters that survived marked one region of space not to enter again, not for fear, but because what lived there now knew how to kill them. Because in that corner of the galaxy, chaos had teeth.